Hi, everyone. Welcome.
Welcome, everybody, to the regional conversations here in North Bay, our first one in Marin, Sonoma, Napa, and Solano counties. And if you want to just introduce yourself in the chat and acknowledge the Indigenous land where you reside, we would appreciate it. And we'll get started in just one more minute as we wait for more folks to come in the room. All right, well, Kara has welcomed an unexpected guest today, which is her daughter, Bernie. And Kara is the Northern California Programs and Organizational Advancement Manager for Californians for the Arts. So she'll be in and out, but I'm gonna try and take over a little bit so that she can take care of Bernie. I'm Julie Baker. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm Executive Director of Californians for the Arts and California Arts Advocates, and I'm coming today from the unceded land of the Nevada City Rancheria Nisenan, otherwise known as Nevada City, California. And it is my pleasure to welcome you here today to a regional conversation and to introduce Kristen Madsen, who is the Executive Director of Creative Sonoma. Kristen.
Thank you, Julie, and good afternoon, everybody. I am delighted to be here and introduce you to my my partners and peers in this co-hosted event with the Californians for the Arts, and that is your Arts Councils of Northern California from Napa, Marin, and Sonoma County. And so from Napa Valley, the Arts Council of Napa Valley, we have Kristen Natale. From Marin, we have Gabriela Colicchio, and I am Kristen Madsen, the Director of Creative Sonoma. And we are delighted for the opportunity to collaborate. We sometimes do it as organizations, but not as often with those of you who are individuals, constituents, artists, and arts organizations. And we know that while our boundaries seem tight in how we can spend money, yours as artists and arts organizations are not. So we are delighted to have the opportunity to help you be more fluid and help us learn from all of you. And with that, I think I kick over. If not, I think I go to Chris Natale.
Oops, other way around.
Sorry.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gabriela Colicchio, and it's so great to see all of you on this call and so many of you from Marin County. So thank you, and thanks to the partners and to Julie and Kara. This is our agenda for the day. So we're starting with the welcomes, and then Julie is going to do an update from Californians for the Arts and California Arts Advocates. Then we will have a question and answer period and a field priorities discussion, then a local advocacy discussion, and I believe that we will do in breakout rooms. And then we will talk about upcoming programs and then adjourn the meeting. And I think I'm passing it over to Chris.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. So good to be here. I am going to present the housekeeping slide here. To enable closed captioning, click the live transcript icon on your Zoom menu bar. Use the raise hand function if you would like to speak or put questions in the chat. Mute your audio when you're not speaking. Be mindful of your own input, be on topic, no long speeches. Use the chat to share resources. We'll be sure to include them in our follow-up email. And this meeting will be recorded and available for viewing later for each of you. And with that, I will turn it back over to Julie. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris, and thanks everyone for joining us here this afternoon. I also want to introduce a couple of our team members. So with us also is Eduardo Robles, who is our manager of communications and field engagement. And Eduardo, are you saying hi? And then Tracy Hudak, who is Kara's counterpoint in Southern California for manager of programs and organizational advancement. This is actually the 10th out of 11 regional conversations that we are doing this year. These were born out of COVID, really in the beginning, out of end of 2020. We recognized how critical it was for all of us to gather and talk about what was happening in terms of federal policy primarily at that point in time. It seems like 100 years ago already, but terms like PPP were not something that we all knew what they meant. And so our job quickly turned into policy translators. And what we found was that it was helpful if we gathered people and we had a chance to actually really unpack all of what was going on, and then also hear from you. And that really helped to also shape some of the things that we did, which we'll talk about in a second. What we did learn, of course, also is that you are very interested in attending these. And last time we didn't actually have one specifically for this area. It was more involved with San Francisco and other places. So we're excited to give the North Bay its own forum for conversation. And if you see people who you think would enjoy this and weren't able to attend today, please inform them about it, as it will be recorded. So I think go to the next slide. So just, I'm going to give a quick presentation, hopefully not too long here, about who we are as an organization, what we've been doing in this last year, and what are our priorities going forward. So just quickly, we have two organizations. California Arts Advocates is a C4, which is a direct lobbying organization. And that's where we have a lobbyist in Sacramento, and we work to directly influence policies, legislation, resources, and make sure that we are in those rooms influencing the conversation to include the arts, culture, and creative industries and the workforce. And I'll talk more specifically about what we've been doing this last year. And then we have Californians for the Arts, which is our C3, and we call it really an advocacy service organization. We're here to help you to become better or more engaged and informed arts advocates, both at the local, state, and federal level. And so we do that through these regional conversations, through our big program, which is April's Arts, Culture, and Creativity Month, which we'll talk a little bit more, and a lot of webinars and professional development around particular policy areas or other things that we see that recognize needs in the field. Next slide. I just wanted to stop also for a second and really address who we are as an organization. We are on a journey to become an anti-racist organization. And I say that as a journey in that it is not just a statement of values that I'm sharing here today. It is not just a list of things that we check the box and say, now we've accomplished it. It really is something that is going to take a lot of internal work, both looking at all of our policies, our procedures, our way of doing business and acting in our lives, and how we undo 400 years of systemic oppression in the way that we've learned how to work and work together. Our values, including things like fighting injustice, affecting social change, assuring racial and cultural representations. The work needs to reflect an inclusive California art history and identity, and how engaging in transformational learning. We hold ourselves accountable. We try to be transparent in the way that we are operating and how we are developing our new systems, but we also ask you to hold us accountable and to join us in this journey as we all work together to make a much more equitable and inclusive California. Next slide. So here are some things that all of us together accomplished last year, which, a year ago, I have to remind all of us, myself included, it was only a year ago that we didn't even have reopening guidelines for the industry. We were not open a year ago. We didn't even know when we might open. And we actually heard that loud and clear in the regional conversations. That was one of the most critical issues for people, was to see where do we see ourselves at that point in the tier system. So one of the things, we did a lot of advocacy and work within California Department of Public Health, developing relationships there and really talking about how arts can be a part of the solution. At the same time, we also recognized how critically, how critical the losses were in terms of being shut down for as long as we were, and what we needed to recover, or the relief funding that we needed. And at the same time, the state of California was also showing that they were having budget surpluses. So this was really the time to go big. And we joined in coalition with California Association of Museums and National Independent Venues Association of California. And we worked together to ask for $1 billion in recovery for our sector. And at the end of the day, we saw over $600 million invested back into arts recovery last year. We worked on legislation, the first creative workforce bill in the United States brought forward by a state. And we got that signed by the governor on October 9th. We saw you engage at levels that we've never seen before. Advocacy engagement increased by over 300%. And we also saw mayors and other civic leaders join us in asking the state to prioritize this level of investment. And again, we hadn't seen that sort of advocacy before, so really grateful for that. Give a little bit more specifics in the next slide about the two different organizations. So for Californians for the Arts, one of the things that we did last year was we worked on a survey, and this was really important in terms of our advocacy and developing the case making of what was happening to our sector. And we had over 600 small businesses, nonprofit organizations, entrepreneurs, sole proprietorships, and 1,000 art workers. And we did 2 different studies. And that really helped to inform, the devastation as well as the fragility of this workforce and how vulnerable this workforce is. Showed that many in the workforce were actually thinking about leaving, as not just the state, but the industry as a whole. And in fact, we released this survey with the Otis report last year, and we were quoted in the New York Times saying that if California doesn't do something, they could be facing a cultural depression. And this really helped. And I talk about this only because not only to say, hey, cool, we got in the New York Times, but more importantly, it's the relationship to media and building public awareness about the impact is part of your advocacy strategy. We did things like mobilizing a statewide reopening arts task force because we saw that that was one of the critical pieces, and we came together and we mobilized this to a point where we are having meetings directly with California Department of Public Health and the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, where finally, like Dee Dee Myers, who runs that department, really heard what was happening. And then they started, introducing us and asking us to come to a lot more meetings and really working in collaboratively to make sure that what they were going to do in terms of reopening included arts and culture and the creative industries. We launched campaigns around Restarts Arts California and a narrative that, thanks to Kristen Madsen, who coined it first. And when I heard her years ago say this, and I went to her and I said, can I use this? And she said, absolutely. So thank you for your generosity, that we have continued to use artists are second responders. And it's really hit home for the legislature and public officials when we talk about it, really makes sense to them. And of course, we talk about Arts, Culture, and Creativity Month. We also have been working on a California Relief Grant, California Venues Grant Program, and assisted over 1,500 organizations apply for that and in doing technical assistance and community outreach. And then finally, in July of last year, some of you may recall when the California Arts Council announced that they only had funded 21% of applicants. And that was right at the same time as the budget was passed and we had all this money that was going to them. We quickly mobilized the field. Over 1,000 of you sent in a petition within 6 days that said, no, we need that funding now. And those grants have already been adjudicated, and we asked them to fund more, and they did, and they doubled down on that funding investment. I know we're all waiting for those checks still, and my understanding is they should be coming any moment now. Next slide. On the lobbying side, directly in terms of what we worked on, as I mentioned, the California Creative Workforce Act. This was authored by Senator Ben Allen. And it was something that we worked on sort of across with a number of advocates and cultural policy people nationally on about getting the creative workforce back to work. And out of that came this idea that we need legislation to actually rebuild the pipeline for the creative industries, but really focus on diversifying the creative workforce, as well as a focus on living wage, which we know is one of the major issues for our sector. And so that is what is in the language of the bill. It was supported by labor. It was supported, we've got bipartisan support in the legislature, and then it was signed by the governor on October 9th. We'll go into a little bit more detail about what we're working on this year with that as well. As I mentioned, over $600 million in historic investments, specific funding through the California Relief Grant Program for cultural institutions, and a lot of testifying, a lot of showing up at hearings, making the case. And of course, with you advocating with us, we saw incredible numbers. I mean, I think when I remember meeting with the governor's office at one point, and they said, yeah, we know, we've been getting the letters, we've received a lot of them. And I can assure you that that really does make a difference. So I always say this, which is that when an advocacy organization sends out an action alert, we're not just doing it because we need something to do today, we're doing it because this is the time we need you to take action. So please do respond when you see that. And then finally, many of you know, we've worked on the issue around AB 5 for years, which was the assembly bill that really impacted the workforce force in terms of changing the employment law, and that more people now are going to be needed to be employees versus independent contractors. Although there are many things around that bill that we do support in terms of wanting living wages for artists, we also know that it's a massive impact for small budget nonprofit performing arts organizations that are not exempt from that. And so we've been working in coalition with folks about this issue. We had a bill last year, it was vetoed by the governor, but we did end up with almost $50 million in the budget for support for organizations under $2 million to access for payroll support up to $75,000. Next slide. Okay, so where's the money? We got all this money last year. Where is it? So just quick status update on some of that. The $49.5 million I just mentioned is not yet open. So those grants, you haven't missed out yet. If you are a small budget nonprofit performing arts organization under $2 million, you can apply for up to $75,000 in payroll support. And that should be coming out in early March, not through this California Arts Council, but through the Office of Small Business Advocate. The California Venues Grant Program, it has opened and closed, and those grant applications are now being reviewed by Lendistry, which is the third party hired by the California Office of Small Business Advocate to administer the program. We are a partner to that program, so if you are in limbo, don't know what's happening with your application, please reach out to us. In addition, we are currently lobbying with CAA to actually have potentially have that reopened and to have some relaxation of some of the requirements so more people can apply that is a little bit more similar to the Shuttered Venues Operators Grant. So stand by for more information on that. If you're a museum, we fought for $50 million last year. That has just opened under the Natural Resources Agency, and that grant program goes to March 11th. And then the Arts Council received $100 million last year, $40 million for creative youth development programs, and $60 million for a new program called the California Creative Corps Pilot Program. Next slide. And there we go. So creative youth development are in the way that the Arts Council has interpreted this is really more around their existing youth arts programs. So they have 6 current programs: Youth Arts Action, Artists in Schools, Arts Education Exposure, Jumpstarts, and Arts Integration Training. One of those programs is open right now for applications. The rest should be open in the spring. But what that means is that it's not coming out of their baseline budget, but there's actually $40 million over the next 3 years to fund just these particular programs. Next slide. Which many of you may have applied for those in the past and they were eliminated or paused during COVID and gone into impact grants and general operating, so they're coming back. And then the Creative Corps Pilot Program is something that we actually worked on directly with the administration to educate them around how artists can be utilized in terms of developing messages, communication strategies, culturally specific messaging in a creative and innovative fashion, probably a lot more effective, let's say, than public health. Not to knock public health, they do a great job, but we can use our artists to communicate. And so that is the sort of nature of the pilot program. There's $60 million going to the California Arts Council for that. We also anticipate that that program will open in the spring. And in our deck, which you can receive a copy of, you'll see an example of a city-based program that was launched in San Francisco that was very much modeled we worked with the state on to see how it can be done. So keep a lookout for that, but that will employ arts organizations and directly artists as well. Really effective advocacy is really important to understand where you stand in terms of the budget process. So just as an overview of where we are in this year's budget process, what I talked about so far is basically was what we did last year. Now we're going into 2022-23 budget. The governor announces that in January. In the January budget, he announced no increase for the ongoing baseline support for the Arts Council. It remains at $26 million. But one-time funding over the next 3 years and $30 million for existing cultural districts, as well as the expansion of the cultural districts program, which is something we've been asking for and are support of. $173,000 for the literary programs, primarily Poet Laureate and Youth Poet Laureate programs. And then a new program, which is $50 million in one-time funds to the California Department of Parks and Recs for art installations, which we are also, we're of course in support of any money for the arts. We love to see arts integrated into other departments as well. We think that's an important strategy. But we also want to make sure that ongoing support is there for arts organizations, that we're not always having to create new programs to get funding. And finally, the governor also put in almost $1 billion for arts education for after school K-6 programs and summer programs. So we're tracking all of that as well. Currently, right now, on the advocacy on the lobbying side, we're meeting with staffers for all the budget committees, talking to them about these items, as well as some of the things that we feel are missing from the budget, which I'll talk about. And we then will see in May, the governor puts out his May revise. Final budget has to be approved by June 15th, otherwise the legislature doesn't get paid. And then the governor has about 12 days to sign or veto that budget. So you'll get a sense of what's coming this year. The things I'm mentioning on here and the investment in the arts have not gone through the budget process yet. Those are just his ideas and his introductions. Next slide. So what are our priorities this year in terms of both on, advocacy that you can engage with in terms of talking about with elected officials, as well as when we get into sort of more direct, what are you going to be asking for? So the California Creative Workforce Act, which I mentioned, which was passed by the legislature and signed by the governor last year, was upon appropriation, which means that it had to have a specific budget attached to it. Did not have an appropriation last year. Some of that was strategic in that last year was very much relief funding. This year, we're hoping we're getting into recovery. And so we are hoping that a legislator, since the governor did not put it in his budget, will introduce an ask of $50 million for that particular program so that we can see liftoff for it. And so stay tuned for that. 805, which I mentioned, which is in response to AB 5, which was vetoed by the governor. That coalition is determining next steps, and we'll keep you informed of where that might go. As I mentioned, the $26 million for the baseline budget for the Arts Council has not moved now in several years. At its height in the year 2000, it was actually over $30 million. If you count for inflation, we should be around $47 million today. And instead we're at 26. So we are hoping that, again, that a legislator will introduce the dollar for the arts, which is per capita. There's about 40 million people in the state of California, to go from 26 million to 40 million over the next 3 years, which would be a $42 million overall increase. And that's because we want to see general support funding for the Arts Council, local assistance for your 3 arts councils here, for example, and others that apply to increase. Because right now you can see that the Arts Council is having to make a lot of prioritizations of who gets the funding. That's partly because there's not enough to go around. So we can't make a pie any bigger, but we can certainly make the ingredients a lot more robust. So let's get it to $1 for the arts. And then, of course, all the other things that we're in support of as well. We're also watching closely what's happening in terms of relief and recovery, both at the federal and state level. And then finally, an exciting ballot measure has been introduced by Austin Buettner from Southern California that is getting a lot of traction. Our board will actually vote this Thursday whether or not we are going to formally endorse the ballot measure. It's called the Arts and Music Ballot Measure. It's about $800 million on average every year would come out of the general fund to be distributed to local schools to fund arts education. So there's a lot for arts ed this year, both in the budget and potentially on the ballot. The ballot needs about 1 million signatures by May, and they're already at over $250,000 signatures, sorry. So we're seeing it's on its way. And as soon as I have the go, likely from our board, you'll hear more information about that from us, as well as our partners at Create California, who are the statewide arts ed advocacy organization we work very closely with in collaboration. Yeah, next slide. This is a little bit more information about the California Creative Workforce Act that you can read about. It also links to the actual bill language. Where we are now, as I said, we're going to be looking for the funding. Likely Senator Allen will introduce an ask for that. And then we will need to look at how do we really operationalize this so we can explain this in more detail to the legislature and to the administration on how the Arts Council would actually take this funding and get it out to our communities to see more diversity and living wage opportunities for people in the creative workforce. Next slide. All right, and then finally, I just wanted to mention federal advocacy. We, as Californians for the Arts, are the state captains to a National Arts Action Summit, which is actually at the end of March this year. In early April, we'll be doing virtual advocacy visits with our federal congressional representatives. And then I also sit on the Cultural Advocacy Group, which is a national network of advocacy organizations that talk about cultural policy. And there are 7 bills currently in Congress that have to do with the creative economy. Again, it'll link, we have some of that information in the deck. The one I wanted to highlight was the Creative Economy Revitalization Act, because 2 California congressional representatives have sponsored it. One is Representative Jay Obernolte, who's a Republican, and Senator Alex Padilla, who's a Democrat. So one of the things I also always want to highlight how bipartisan the arts are, and how critical they are for the recovery and for every community here in California. That's a WPA-like program for the 21st century. It has a $300 million appropriation ask, and we're just starting with all of these bills. So keep apprised of that either through us or through other statewide federal advocacy organizations like the Arts Action Fund. There's also funding, as we have at the budget level here for the Arts Council. We have it at the federal level for the NEA and NEH. You can see that. We're looking at things like the employee retention tax credit. There's been a bill introduced to try and get that reinstated for the 4th quarter. There's more potential COVID-19 relief. Of course, right now, everything is being focused on, sort of Ukraine and other things going on. And then in January, there was a really exciting hearing called the Power, Peril, and Promise of the Creative Economy that our colleagues at Be an Arts Hero really helped to make happen. And that link, you can also watch it. But out of that, our California representatives, Judy Chu and Young Kim, were there. And Judy Chu actually followed up with Office of Small Business to say you must do something to support the arts, culture, and creative industries. So just a lot of attention also happening at the federal level. It's been a real game changers in terms of advocacy these last several years. So what has been a challenge, we see as a tremendous opportunity as well. Next slide. And then I'm not going to play these, but it's just, you can watch these another time. I just wanted to share, we have fantastic representation, both at the state and federal level, great support for arts, culture, and creativity. Both there's a message from State Senator Ben Allen, who was the author of the California Creative Workforce Act, is also the chairman of the Joint Committee on the Arts here in the state, and our Senator Alex Padilla, as I mentioned, who has authored the Creative Economy Revitalization Act, among other things, in support of our very important industry, which is almost 8% of the state's gross domestic product for the state of California. Next slide. And that's it. I'm done talking. Are you done listening to me talk about what's going on? So I realize it's kind of a lot, but happy to now just stop for a second, take a sip of water, and see if you've got any questions about what I just shared, or I think there was a slide with some questions. So anyone else want to jump in here? Now is your time. Kara, did I get that right? Is that what?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
So if there's any questions about the updates, you can feel free to raise your hand using the raise hand function here on Zoom. You can throw them in the chat and we'll collate them. And we're also just wanting to hear from you in general. What are your current needs or priorities?
And we know not everybody is comfortable unmuting and raising their hand, so you can also put stuff in the chat. Either you can talk about sort of something you'd like more clarity on or understanding about that I just talked about, or tell us some of the things that you're concerned about that you want to see. So for music, what are the 3 top priority funding and advocacy issues? Well, Meredith, you tell me. She's laughing. What? Yeah, you have to unmute.
What I'm trying to do is take the slides that I don't have in front of me anymore and condense them into a summary that I can use after this meeting. So it's more distilling the information you provided, for me to, there's so much that I don't know where to start. So I thought if I could have like what you see as the top 3 things, you know, rather than me tell, I mean, I don't know that, I don't know if you can, because there's just so much and I don't have the slides in front of me, so I can't figure out where to begin.
Yeah. Yeah.
The first 3 steps. I mean, I'm just trying to go somewhere with this.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think what I was trying to do is kind of give you a broad picture with some detail of sort of what is available currently, right? So there are some funding pockets that are currently available. There was the Live Venues Grant Program at the state level that is specific to a lot of people in music, but also in the performing arts. So if they didn't apply for that, they should stay tuned and hopefully we'll see that reopen based on what we're working on. If you're in the nonprofit arts, if you're an artist and musician, there is actually also YBCA received over $1 million Yerba Buena Center for the Arts from the California Arts Council for artist relief grants. Those should be coming out also in March or April. And so stay tuned for and keep an eye on that. There are opportunities always through the Arts Council for people in the music industry in the nonprofit side of the sector to be applying there. For the Office of Small Business Advocate, that is for-profit and nonprofit. And even things like the Arts and Parks potential budget item is not just for sculptures, it's also for performances at parks as well. So there's a lot of different ways that I think specifically for music, we can see the impact, and for musicians as well. And so happy to also, Meredith, based on who you're trying to summarize this for, you're welcome to reach out to us as well. And I see Meredith, come join in conversation.
Hello. Hi, I'm Meredith Suttles. I'm the new managing director and CEO of Marin Theater Company. And a few things have, in my short time, I'm just coming up on a year here in my role, but in my short time, there are a couple of kind of glaring things that I'm noticing and wonder about in terms of where support can come from. And that's one is workforce development. It's very clear that, because of cost of living, a lot of, work not being available, et cetera, that a lot of people who are trained in the arts have either left the field or just have left the area in support in looking for work. And so there is a gap in the workforce here. And so, there's some funding that could be really useful in the area of workforce development. And probably hand in hand with that is also, supporting, affordable housing for artists. And how that, and so those are the kind of two things in terms of what the need might be for, rebuilding and reimagining what the art, what the creative workforce is here in this state, and particularly in this county. Those are the two things that come to mind.
Yeah, thank you for that, Meredith, and thank you for sharing that. I would say that that's exactly, you sound like what I was telling legislators all last year in terms of why we needed the California Creative Workforce Act, very specifically, but now, and so it's great. It's wonderful. It's written on paper. It's socializing that it's, our creative workforce is a state priority, and development of that is a state priority, which we've never seen before, but it really means nothing at the end of the day if there's not an appropriation, right? So, I mean, it means something. I can't say all that work last year didn't mean anything, but at the end of the day, really to see it make an impact for your organization and for artists and for the creative workforce, and to see that pipeline, we need the funding. So join us in advocacy this year on trying to convince the legislature and the administration to give that program lift off. So that's number one. Second piece is in terms of housing, what we try to illustrate, obviously housing is a massive issue in the state of California. There's a lot of housing advocates. There's a lot of housing bills. They passed a lot of housing packages last year. And what we try to illustrate is that our workforce is part of the vulnerable workforces in our communities that need the affordable housing, right? Because I think legislators often, public officials, this is a sweeping generalization, but we have some studies that show that they often think of the arts as sort of elitist activity, right? We can all afford to be, doing it, and we just do it for a hobby. And our job is to really explain and educate around who is this workforce? What is their value and benefit? What are they providing to our communities? And then what is the support that they need as well? So we're part of the solution, but we also are part of a bigger problem that the state is dealing with. So we see a lot of intersection with working on those housing packages to make sure that there are, that's why cultural districts could be a way to also ensure that funding stays within a community and that, includes investments in a particular district, not to get nice fancy lofts for people to move into and cut and push the artists out, but to keep people in those communities specifically. So I think you're absolutely right. It's something that we need to continue to share. And I think that I would, advocate also that you check in with your Office of Economic and Workforce Development in your cities and counties, that you talk to your housing departments there as well, and let them know, because I don't think that they always recognize that we need to be a part of these conversations. We often tend to only show up in the arts rooms. We have to show up in these other rooms and say, we're here too. So hopefully that helps to write the second, Meredith, and anything more that you want to share with us, please. I will always put my information here too and reach out as well.
Thank you. Yes, I'll thumbs up.
Awesome.
We've got
Great.
some questions in the chat too, Julie.
Great. Yeah.
Will any of the budget items around after school or summer programs result in funding opportunities for individual nonprofits?
Yeah, it's good question. Oftentimes what happens is the budget starts in January. It's a bit of a longer process. We won't really know if this will even make it through the budget process. This goes through the Department of Education. There wasn't a lot of detail, honestly, in what the governor put for this $937 billion. So I don't know is the answer to that, how it would be operationalized in terms of, would it go to school districts and then they would hire arts nonprofits? Would it go directly to arts nonprofits to hire teaching artists? I don't know that level of detail yet, but we can certainly continue to try and find that out and work with our partners at Create as well. Tracy, do you want to let me know other ones that were in there? Kristen, yeah, sure. And then we'll go to the ones in the chat as well.
Me, Kristen? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Jacobs, and I'm the executive director with Youth and Arts. I would love you to elaborate a little bit about the AB5 relief that you mentioned. I'm preaching to the choir here, but AB5 really hit right before the pandemic. And then being an arts education provider, we had to transition not only all of our agreements and our hiring classifications, but also the agreement in which we were working with artists. So now creating digital content and work product and things like that. So we really got into uncharted territory where we wanted to make sure we were fairly compensating teaching artists specifically for both their creation and the use of their work product that they created with us. So all that to say, it's had a large implication on our budget as we are racing to keep up and pay people fairly. And as Meredith just pointed out, try to keep them in the area and well compensated. So my ears perked up when you started talking about the AB5 relief. And I would just love to hear more about the timeline on that and how we might help advocate for that, but also get our hands on that as well.
Sure. Yeah. No, I always say, where's the money?
Yeah.
So it is in the Office of Small Business Advocate as well. It's $49.5 million. And it was built into the budget. So it's not its own piece of legislation, it's part of the budget bill. So there's specific information around that, which probably somewhere on our website, but I can also make sure that I share specifically what that looks like. It has not been opened yet. The Office of Small Business Advocate did an RFP for a third party to administer it. In the past, they've used Lendistry. If you've applied for the California Relief Grant Program, I wouldn't be surprised if it's Lendistry again, but we don't know for sure. And then that would, I believe that the date, and don't hold me to it in case things change, that they said that it would likely start to be opened is March 8th. We work really closely with the Office of Small Business Advocate. We are telling them how critical this is. They prioritized relief funding first, so like venues grant, relief grants, and I actually saw Director Tara Lynn Gray at the California Economic Summit, and I said, how's this going? Because this is relief funding too. It's just relief from a different issue. And so we've been talking about sort of COVID and AB5 as a 1-2 punch for our industry. It's a very nuanced issue. And I think, it's challenging in that we want to fight for artists to be valued and to receive living wages, right? That is really, really critical for us to see a change for our sector, right? For us to be able to afford to live in the places that we want to live, and sustainability. At the same time, we've been systemically undercapitalized for forever. And so we can't afford to pay people a living wage. So it's this really tough tension, right? That we have been working for years now to educate the legislature around. They've heard from their districts. They've heard that this is an issue. Honestly, though, AB5 is something that every Democrat voted in support of. And now in an election year, it's really challenging for them also to talk about it being an issue that is ongoing as a sore point, let's say, in some ways, because then it becomes sort of like a Republican talking point, politics gets in it as well. So it's challenging. And I would say that where we are right now is that the 805 coalition, which was the bill last year that tried to address this in an ongoing manner to say, okay, we know this is a problem. How can we get a system that is essentially a payroll support system, right, from the state, and then a paymaster. So not only do you have to pay people, you have to set up all these systems, and many arts organizations didn't have those systems. The California Arts Council also has received $500,000 from last year's budget to set up a paymaster system so that arts organizations could pay into that, and we can aggregate those fees. And so that is TBD. That has not also been out for an RFP. So we're closely tracking that. So I would say, Kristen, couple things. One is get on our e-list if you're not already. Make sure you're getting our updates so you know when that program is open for the $49.5 million. And then on the AB5 response, 805 coalition, whatever it may be, we will be coming back to you soon with what we think might be happening in the legislature this year around that issue.
Great, thank you.
And then finally, I'd just say locally, I would make sure that you let your own state representatives know that this continues to be a hardship, and then let your other funders know. I don't think this is an employment law issue, but it is also that the state created with a Supreme Court decision. But this is also an issue of fair wages, and arts funders need to understand the pressure that we're under to do this, and that that's part of what they need to do in terms of helping us and support us in funding.
Wonderful, thank you.
That's my soapbox for any arts funders here.
One more question in the chat. Anne is asking if we know any specifics on the iteration of the new cultural district program, when funded or when we might know. And
yeah, so that's again part of the budget process. So it's only been introduced. We wouldn't have it through the budget process until June, early July. Then it would go to the Arts Council. Then the Arts Council would work on the grant guidelines. Then it would, so I would imagine at the pace in which we see things, you're probably not seeing how that would come about. And this is a guess, don't hold me to it, until probably 2023, maybe late 2022. What I can point you to, though, is things like the legislature does an analysis also of what the governor puts in a budget. So they've done an analysis looking at that particular product I do think it's gonna, the $30 million, I do think that has a good chance of getting through the legislature because it was a bill that the legislature signed for cultural districts in 2016. In addition, there was a report done in 2017 that you can, it's hard to find on the Arts Council's website, but I found it in one of their packets, and it does talk about what the districts need, and it talks about equity targets and assessments in particular in terms of expanding it, and then it talks specifically about the 14 existing ones needing money. So I think that I would look at all of that. And then I see also just pre-COVID, 100% funding is project-based. We really need operating support to right-size our infrastructure, particularly around staff salaries, so we can move forward. Absolutely, and yes to affordable housing. And I'll just say, Jeanette, that is part, and I see your hand up too, so please come join in the conversation. But I would say that that is part of why we're asking for the dollar for the arts. You know, these wonderful special programs like the 50 million for arts and the parks, we want the both and, right? We want it all, because none of it is unrealistic, nor is it enough really for who we're talking about, you know, 750,000 workers in the state of California. So we think that that's where Jeanette, that's why we want that baseline budget for the Arts Council to increase, so that it's not to create new programs, but to increase the funding pots for those existing programs. And certainly what we know that we're talking about when we do our advocacy is around general support. But did you want to add to that?
No, this is actually more adding to Kristen's question about AB 5 and relating to SB 805, 808, 805, SB 805, where my understanding of that was it was really driven by Southern California small arts organizations who really wanted a paymaster, which we don't really need in Northern California. I mean, we've got Talent Fund, we've got paymasters here. So that $500,000 that the California Arts Council has to set up a paymaster seems, anyway, but my understanding of 805 was that part of it was for the paymaster, and then the second half was appropriations for actually paying staff salaries, because it's not so much the paymaster, it's the actual money to pay people. And then my understanding was that that second half, the appropriations, that was completely eliminated. So this $70,000, up to $70,000 that you're mentioning for organizations under $2 million, is that part of that second half of SB 805? Or can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is that, Jeanette, it was definitely Southern California started the 805 coalition, and Senator Susan Rubio authored the bill and was an incredible champion for it. But there were others in Northern California and San Jose area that also engaged in the process. So just number one, they were part of the coalition. But in addition, 805, yes, the $49.5 million that's going to the California Office of Small Business Advocate is why 805 in a sense was vetoed by the governor. He's like, it's already in the budget, right? We gave you that. So essentially it is what was in, it was in one iteration of the bill. The bill changed many times. But at one point it changed in terms of the language. What was in the budget item for the $49.5 million doesn't exactly match what 805 wanted, but it's close and it's addressing the same issue. The problem is it's a one-time fund, right? It's $49.5 million up to $75,000 one time. So what we don't know is what's going to happen, you know, after that. And legislation helps to sort of identify a problem and try to solve it in a more ongoing fashion as a budget item, just as a one-time, like usually they're one time. So we'll see where the 805 coalition, and Jeanette, please join, and I'll let you know when they're meeting again if you're interested, to what they're going to do next, their move. They are looking at some legislators to champion it again this year, and working with entertainment labor unions, presenting it together, because it's going to be really critical that they're there supporting it as well. So there is funding this year for specifically that, up to $75,000 for payroll. So that is the good news. I'm like pointing at you. You can't see me now. I'm pointing at you. All right. So I think unless there's any more questions right now, I think what we're going to transition to is Eduardo Robles on our team is going to share with you something that we just want you to take a little bit of time to do. So Eduardo.
Hi, everyone. Great discussion, generative thinking to transition into our regional conversations poll. As Julie has highlighted, a lot of our case making and messaging and policy making comes from a lot of the data that we collect, and this regional conversations poll is one of those data sets that helps us in those areas. So if you can please take the next 5 minutes to fill it out. It has about 12 to 14 questions. A lot of the questions had to do with a lot of the ideas that you guys were thinking about in terms of needs of your region. So open up a tab, keep it open if you don't finish the survey, but we do need this. It's very helpful for us, this data to push forward the needs of the field. So do answer thoughtfully and come back to it and finish it if you don't in the next 5 minutes. Okay, thank you so much. We got about 2 more minutes left. Again, you can return to the survey and complete it a little bit later, but 2 minutes to wrap it up.
Tracy or Kara, can you address Marjorie's having trouble accessing? Thanks, Tracy. All right, so I think we're about on task here at 2:55. Not sure if Kara is
I am here.
able to join. Awesome. Okay, great. I'm gonna hand it to you. Okay. With
Great.
the crib behind you.
I know, okay. Appropriate. Great, so thank you for that. If you didn't have a chance to finish your survey, no worries. You can submit it later. We just hope that you will get it to us today, by the end of the meeting if you can, or later. We're gonna now break into just 2 rooms to discuss some local advocacy strategies and discussion. We thought it'd be a little bit more intimate, and we have 2 rooms, kind of 2 different topics. And you're going to be able to self-select which room you'd like to go to. And this is just kind of a peer-to-peer conversation. We'll have local arts leaders in the room as facilitators, as well as ourselves and staff, CFTA staff. So room 1 is, the discussion is sort of centered around connecting advocacy to your work, and also how equity plays a role in advocacy in your work. And that can be your work as an organization, as an artist, as an arts administrator. You can approach that conversation through whatever lens makes the most sense for you. And then room 2 is just a discussion around local advocacy strategies and resources. And this might also include initiatives that are currently really relevant to the arts in your county or your area. And so I'm going to go ahead and open the rooms. We'll also be here to help you get into the rooms if it's not obvious to. Great, all the rooms are open, and we'll speak for about 15 minutes and then come back together to wrap up. So the breakout rooms bar, you should be able to see that on your Zoom menu. You can also put what room you'd like to go into in the chat, and I can move you to that room. Sometimes that's easier if you haven't done it before, but feel free to go ahead and start joining the room of your choice.
Thank you for Kristen for asking that question. Room number 1 is about connecting advocacy to your work and to equity. And room number 2 is local advocacy strategies and resources.
I don't know how to get to a breakout room. Mine doesn't.
Which one would you like to join?
I'll go with the connecting advocacy to your work. Thank you.
And if you guys are having trouble getting into a room, I can help assign you to a room. Just let me know.
And yes, if you're multitasking and just want to hang out in the main room for about 15 minutes, everyone will be rejoining in about 15 minutes. Marjorie, got you. I'm gonna put you in room 1.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I know it can be confusing. So anyway, if you want to shout out what room you want to go in, I'm happy to help get you in there.
I'm here. I'm sorry. I have people working on things in my yard and and my dog got out. I had to check.
No worries. Are you interested in joining one of the local discussions?
Sure. I just had to.
Oh
take a
yeah,
break
no.
For a second.
Oh gosh, no worries, no stress at all. We just got everyone moved. We have a conversation around connecting advocacy to your work, and then also a conversation around local advocacy strategies.
Oh boy. Connecting advocacy to work.
Gotcha. Okay.
I'm trying to figure out what I can do. You know, both connecting with needs in the community, but also advocating as an individual. I'm trying to figure out where to go with all of this.
Yeah, I think that's the right spot for you then, especially just to hear how other people are doing that, right? For themselves, for their jobs. Okay, I can put you over there, Meredith.
Great to hear you.
Glad you're here.
Little one. It's great. I was taking care of my dog.
Oh yes, dogs, kids, they require attention.
So
Welcome back, everyone. I'm hoping, oh, thanks, Eddie. I'm hoping that what we can do is spend just a little bit of time, a few minutes here, doing a little bit of share out from the room so that folks who weren't in one of the rooms can kind of hear some takeaways.
Sounds like Bernie's got some.
She has a lot of thoughts.
Want me to chime in from room 2? Great. Yeah, we had a really good discussion on 3 kind of advocacy win or advocacy topics. The first prompted in San Rafael, really kind of interesting collision between an onerous public art policy that even governed what happened on private property, and trying to work through mural projects in that system, and a Breonna Taylor mural being put on city property as a direct action, like let's have this conversation, and a new mayor that has started a re-investigation of these policies and moving them forward, and also a win in terms of getting an art and culture component in the general plan, that 20-year land use plan that governs how counties and cities will make decisions around land use in the future, which is a great win. So there's that. We have had another conversation about artist housing and how to get artist live work housing started, some ideas there. And then in American Valley, Teresa is working to assist local nonprofits in applying for grants and trying to increase each other's ability to draw funding and support from outside the area. And she reported that one.
Awesome, that's great. Does anyone else have anything from Tracy's room that wanted to add anything while we're here? Or maybe you didn't get a chance to chime in when you were in the room together? If not, no worries. What about from room 1?
Jump in and Chris, fill in the gaps for me if you want to. I think a couple of things. One was that we felt like our questions again were about how are you incorporating advocacy into your work? And I think there was a strong conversation about the fact that during COVID, advocacy sort of, while in the traditional mindset of going to the state or the local, state, or federal level, it really recognized that advocacy can also be peer-to-peer, because we all became advocates for our fellow organizations that some one of us might have learned more about PPP than others and became the translators of how that all makes sense or doesn't. We worked with our networks of organizations that were sharing that information a little more readily, and we were working, it was expressed that we felt a lot more connective tissue amongst organizations and sharing over the past 2 years than we might have in past years. So that was pretty interesting. And then thinking about how that plays out in terms of equity, I think Chris made the really excellent point that when you're operating in a moment of fear, which so many of us were, self-preservation or institutional preservation sort of takes hold, and you go after what you need to do first and foremost for your own organization. And it reminded us of the education that has to continue to take place for all of us to remember we're not in this alone, and we do have a responsibility for our entire ecosystem of which we are members. And so we do need to pay attention to and care for those other folks, and recognize a point that was brought up at the end of our conversation, the translation, and I don't mean from English to Spanish or other language, but the translation of government speak or process to folks that have not been at the table and do not even know what's being served at the table, much less, what utensils to use, and to beat that metaphor, but how do we translate for the people that don't even know what these opportunities are and how to get at them? So again, the thinking of taking care of and helping and advocating for other folks to even know what's available is really critical, and that we really need to recognize there's still the same group of us sitting at the table talking to each other, and how do we find those other folks and get them here? We didn't have great answers to that, and the recognition that all of this is going to take us all consistent effort and a lot of time.
I think the only thing I can add is also just we really looked at how crisis really points out the holes in equity. When you're looking at things, you really see where you're missing when crisis drives you into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are some really, really key takeaways there that feel like they could be a whole hour and a half long conversation there too, around what you guys just brought up and discussed there. Oh, sorry, anything else to add from room one? Anyone else that wanted to add anything? I think I'll shut down. Chris and Kristen, not to put you on the spot, but just as partners today, is there anything that you're working on that from your perspective and your roles that you wanted to share out in the few minutes that we have here?
I think my big one is the Napa County grants are currently open for arts and culture 501c3s. So that's our biggest funding to those organizations that happen yearly. So that is open now. So apply, apply, apply.
And for Creative Sonoma, we have a Arts and Culture Equity Fellowship Program. It's brand new for us, and it is open now until March 1st. Sam, correct me if I said that wrong. So we are definitely looking for individuals. It's that same question. We've been doing outreach, but if there's anyone on this call that knows anybody that lives in Sonoma County that is working and doing projects and programming in and for people of color, we would really love to get those applications in and try to make this fellowship go great guns. I will also say one other thing for anyone from Sonoma on the call. This year, as you noticed from the email that Sam sent out to you, this is the first year you're probably feeling a decrease in your funding from us, because last year and a half, we were able to supplant what was missing from the county budget with federal funds. So we don't have that this year. So we need to be thinking about how do we get to our county supervisors and let them know that that hit on that budget that we are now feeling for the first time since they did it a couple of years ago really shouldn't be sustained. And so we need to be thinking about how we can get them to think about growing that budget. So more to come on that.
Thanks, Chris, for sharing that in the chat. And Kristen, if you want to put your resources, if anybody else has resources to share, please put them in the chat and we will include them in the follow-up email to all of you. And here's what's coming up next for Californians for the Arts. April is Arts, Culture, and Creativity Month. The state, all of us, had the state declare that 2 years ago. And we leverage that spotlight on the arts to activate the state, to change the conversation about the value of the arts, to get more advocates involved, and to talk with legislators. So next slide, please. Arts, Culture, and Creativity Month has a couple of different components. We'll kick off this year with a webinar explaining all the different facets. We also will have social media and messaging campaigns around the arts work, our theme. The arts work to heal, to build community, to advance justice, to empower youth, to stimulate economies. We'll have webinars on those topics, panel discussions, as well as messaging campaigns. And of course, we'll have advocacy actions that you can take locally or statewide throughout the whole month. And that culminates in Advocacy Week. Advocacy Week is when we help organize you in teams, in delegations, to meet via Zoom with your elected officials. If you're interested in participating in Advocacy Week, we're looking for captains and delegates, and it's perfect for seasoned lobbyists all the way to somebody who's just advocacy curious. There's lots of support and training, and we'd love to have you participate. And we're looking at still tentatively having an in-person advocacy day and award ceremony in Sacramento at the end of the month, and we'll just see how it goes with keeping everybody safe with COVID. And of course, the best way to stay connected to what's happening is to join us as a member. Your membership not only supports the work, you also empower us to fight for you on the state level, and it's the best way to stay informed and connected. And we're deeply grateful for members and funders and for making this work possible. Thank you.
And I'll just add, thank you, Tracy, so much. And I want to add a couple of things that are coming up. We will actually be doing another AB5 workshop with an employment lawyer, specifically around the music industry. We did one that was more focused on theaters recently with our friends at the Theatrical Producers League of Southern California. This one will be with the Association of California Symphony Orchestras, and that'll be on March 9th. So that's just going to be announced shortly. I can't tell if I froze or if that's just in the transition. And then we also are starting something called Wonky Wednesday, which is for those who are interested in going a little bit deeper into some policy conversations, understanding the legislative process, what we're up to, very informal. I'll lead it. There'll be special guests as well. It'll be, I think it's the second Wednesday of or the first Wednesday of every month at noon, sort of a lunchtime thing. Starts on Wednesday, March 2nd. This is a benefit for our members, so hopefully encourages you to join. Our membership starts at $25 for students and goes up from there. And you can be an organization and join too. But anyway, most of our programs are free and accessible for everyone. But we're an arts nonprofit too, so we're doing our earned revenue piece. And member benefits. We want to make sure that there are some there. For you, not just to be supporting all the great work that you need to have in a statewide advocacy organization, because I think what Kristen Jacobs said in our breakout is that I think what we learned in this last couple of years is we need advocacy for the arts and culture and creative sector. So we hope that you'll join us in continuing to do that as the year progresses. We're still in the beginning of the legislative season this year, so lots more to come. Sign up for our e-list. That will give you a lot of information on what we're up to. And we're so grateful to our partners, Kristen Madsen at Creative Sonoma, Chris at Arts Council of Napa Valley, and Gabriella with Marin County. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us here today. We're going to give you back 5 minutes of your day because, as Kristen said, what we need is more time. So enjoy, and thanks again for joining in conversation with us. We truly, truly appreciate it. We learned so much. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.